Welcome everyone to this special edition of Monday Match Analysis. I'm Gill Gross. Today's episode is our traditional post-major chat with Steve Flink, US Open 2025. A lot of Sinner Alcaraz talk at the top. We'll do some Novak Djokovic. We have a bigger picture discussion about the chasers, right? Everybody behind that top group, especially Sinner and Alcaraz, trying to close the gap before we take a closer look at Taylor Fritz, Felix Auger-Aliassime. That is all to come. So without further ado, here's Steve Flink. We're joined once again by Hall of Fame tennis writer Steve Flink for our traditional post-major chat, the last of 2025, recapping, dissecting, debriefing from the US Open. Steve, good to see you. Always good to see you in person during the tournament, and looking forward to mixing it up again.
Yeah, same here, Go. It's great seeing you that one day fleetingly, but at least we caught up.
Absolutely. All right, so we'll start where we've started with the last three, and that's talking about a Sinner Alcaraz final. But I actually kind of want to zoom out because Carlos Alcaraz hasn't really played a bad match since Miami. Somebody who ended up kind of getting a reputation as being the less consistent top player, the top player who you never know what you're necessarily going to get from, who puts himself in a lot of holes and has to work himself out. He has been so consistent for the second half of 2025. What do you think has produced that consistency? I mean, is it just a maturation process?
I think he hears I wonder, Gil, it's, now that you bring it up, I'm sure that he hears that criticism of him that he's heard. And I'm sure that even Ferrero has pointed it out to him. Whatever the reasons, this was by far his most consistent major. Now, let's go back. You're right. He hasn't really played a bad match as Miami, but still, you had matches like the French semi against Musetti where he drops the first set and goes into a second set tie-break. He had dangerous moments, and he had them all through Wimbledon too. But what made not bad matches, but at least streaky matches that would contribute to that image of him as inconsistent. But to go through the Open, lose his serve 3 times, and only once to Novak, only once to Sinner. To not lose a set until the final, so 1 set for the fortnight. I mean, you followed him as closely as I have. I don't think we've never seen that from him over the course of a major. We've seen him impressively win 5 setters at the end. We've seen him, I mean, deservedly take those other major crowns. Now he's won 2 each of 3 majors, leaves only Australia to conquer. But I never seen him sustain it like that over the course of the 2 weeks. And I'm sure that Sinner was taking notice of that. It's not as if they don't pay attention to what their opponents are doing. And he surely was aware that this was a dialed in, zoned in Carlos Alcaraz, to be sure.
I do remember at the end of last year, Carlos said, I want to be more like Jannik. Like that is a goal coming into 2025. I think it was a goal of his coming into the year to have just a more steadily successful season instead of having the bad month here or there. But also we saw the high end, Steve. I mean, there's no doubt that he put it all together and played a final that I believe was the best performance of his career. And what he has in terms of abilities, movement, power, finesse, creativity, lack of weakness, like when he plays as sharp and buttoned up and clear-headed as possible, the high end is just so through the roof. And it felt like in this final, he hit that high end in the clouds where nobody can really reach.
It's a fair point. I agree with you, Gil, I guess 95% of the way. I only would add that I think it was compounded by Sinner perhaps sensing how well Carlos was executing, then tried a little too hard, pressed a little too much. I didn't like the way he started the match, getting broken in the first game despite 30 love and a game point later. He looked frustrated to me, dumped that volley, and then that cost him the second break to go down 5-2. And I felt like he didn't keep up his end of the bargain so much. There wasn't much he could do. let me separate it. I mean, on
Yeah.
Carlos' serve, I don't think there was any blame to be leveled at Sinner for not doing that, because Carlos just served so deadly accurately the whole match. And he the only time he faced break points was when he went down 3-1 in that second set and got broken at love. Otherwise, he didn't even have to face a break point. And I think that was his own doing. The way he moved the serve around, the way he backed it up was almost sheer perfection. Where I fault Sinner is on his own serve, because Carlos would get returns back. They weren't always great returns. He was just trying to keep the ball in play as much as possible, make Sinner play, which was smart. And then Jannik was missing some forehands off those returns that to me were uncharacteristic of him. So I definitely put the emphasis. I would add this.
Yeah.
Even if Sinner had been much more on, I think it was going to be Carlos's day. It was just going to be a much tighter match. A tighter 4, maybe it could have gone 5, but most likely just more like a 6-4, 5-7, 7-5, 7-6 type match, as opposed to the one-sided sets, which I think for the crowd was a bit of a letdown, even as well as Carlos was playing. To have a 6-2 set and a 6-1 set for Carlos, you couldn't have written that script.
I felt similarly about Wimbledon the other way. Jannik has this incredible performance.
Yeah.
Alcaraz also has a suboptimal performance.
Yeah, that's true.
By his standard.
Yeah, I agree with that. I just don't think it was quite as extreme. Maybe I think, and at least Carlos, to his credit, was creating tension. He was, you kind of sensed he might break back at any time. You sensed that, he was competing well, and he had his moments, and there were some service games that got away and some break opportunities that eluded him. But I felt like relatively he played better than Sinner. But you're right, no doubt that was not top of the line Carlos either, in which case that could have been, instead of a very good match, a great match.
I mean, when they're both playing well,
right.
I expect a really tight battle. I expect something like what we saw at Roland Garros.
Right.
When it's not like that, it's usually two-sided, where one of them played like they usually do, which is the best in the world, and the other was a little bit off.
Yeah, you're right. Now, but here's what I want, where I kind of like to get to see how you feel, and I'll let you know how my thoughts.
Okay.
My concern for Sinner is you lose to Carlos 5 in a row prior to Wimbledon, and you have a lot of chances in those matches. The 5-setter at Roland Garros in 24 when he's up 2-1 and initially up 6-2 to love. Then, the strong start at Indian Wells earlier that year, 6-1 set, but he gets beaten. And then Beijing, where he's up serving at 3-love in the tiebreaker, double mini break up, and doesn't win another point. Now, I'm not saying it was his fault, by the way, because that was another case of Carlos just exploding into magic.
In Beijing.
Yeah. There was nothing Sinner could have done. It was entirely Carlos erupting. But I'm just saying, those are frustrating losses. And then I do fault Sinner a little bit on Roland Garros for what I thought was some apprehension on those match points when he had triple match point in the fourth. 2 of the 3 uncharacteristic errors from him. But still, as you say, they were both near the peak of their powers. Great match. But my point is, Sinner has all those frustrating losses. Then he does turn it around at Wimbledon, which was, I thought, a critical win for him. And then he gets sick in Cincinnati. It counts in the record books, and maybe he can dismiss it, but that was a missed opportunity. If he's healthy, it's hard courts, maybe he can get some confidence by beating Carlos again. It doesn't happen. And then we go to the Open, where, as you say, I agree with your assessment in the sense that it seemed more like a straight set match than a 4-set match. There was that one moment that Sinner seized to go up 3-1 in the second, and he held his serve all through that set, and a well-played set by him, but otherwise he was obliterated. Now he's lost 7 out of 8. I already thought Carlos was a little bit in his head prior to Wimbledon. Then I thought he did himself a favor by coming through there as a critical win for him. But now to lose again, he can dismiss Cincinnati, but to lose again in the Open final on his surface. Again, we thought that this was his most comfortable surface and could be Carlos's worst, which Carlos has now he's put that to naught. He's dismissed that. He's proven that when he puts his mind to it, he can play sublime tennis on any surface. So, and that's, to me, the lesson of the Open, is that here was perhaps his best major ever, and it comes on hard courts. But my point being, I just for Sinner to make the comments he did, Gill, afterwards about the changes he needs to make, I'm too predictable. That actually worried me a bit, only in the sense that he's not going to ever be Carlos Alcaraz. So the changes have got to be minimal. They've got to be moderate. And hopefully that will be the case with the benefit of his coaches guiding him, that he won't get carried away. But he also added he might have to take some losses in the pro. I don't know. I think his whole psyche is built on beating everybody, on consistency, and nobody else is going to touch me. The only one who can beat me is Carlos, and I know I can still beat Carlos. So now suddenly it was understandable that he would be a bit rattled by that loss, the decisiveness of it. But I just wonder where it's going from here. I think there's potential for Sinner to at least in the short term, for Carlos to take over for a while. Again, he could go on another one of those 5-6 match streaks. Your thoughts?
Well, I think Sinner now feels like he is fully the chaser. And it's incredible for somebody who's had as much success as he's had in the last 2 years to probably feel like basically unsatisfied because of this one head-to-head. But I believe that going into this offseason, the thought will be, I wasn't good enough this year because Alcaraz beat me too much. And last year was an incredible year, but Alcaraz beat me too many times and I'm not getting him enough. And something's got to change here. And everything is going to be pointed towards changing that head to head. I fully agree with you about the post-match comments being a little bit concerning because you can't really see, I don't see a world in which Sinner becomes this unpredictable player who's using a lot of variety and hitting great drop volleys all the time.
Right.
And it's almost like, well, Jannik, you served 48%. You didn't serve well. You didn't hit your forehand well. You didn't hit your +1 forehand well. Your +1 forehand is usually awesome. So it's like the identity crisis happening in his head was probably not him seeing completely straight, but I said this the other day, with the benefit of time, right? That was him right after the match, as they have the in-depth conversations of, okay, what do we really need to look at to turn this around? Perhaps he won't land on that with the benefit of hindsight and when he puts more thought into it.
Gill, I really hope you're right. And if that's the case, I would be a little less concerned. That's a good assessment, and I hope you're right, because like you, I mean, we all root for the rivalry. We root for the best thing for tennis is if they do go back and forth a bit, because inevitably they're going to keep meeting in a lot of finals. In spite of what Sinner said about how he might need to take some losses, I still think the other guys are going to have a very tough time stopping him. So to me, there's a good chance they meet in 3 more Grand Slam finals next year. At least 2, but probably 3.
Yeah. What stood out to you? Well, we talked about the serving. Let's actually I want to take a second to only talk about the serving, because another thing that has been evident, other than Sinner not winning a lot of these close ones, and Alcaraz being better on the big points in a lot of these 50-50 matches, one thing that's been pretty common is we come away from these Sinner-Alcaraz matches and we say, well, Sinner didn't serve well, or Alcaraz outserved Jannik, and it's supposed to be the other way. I feel like Carlos has made up a lot of ground in terms of improving his serve, and Sinner has plateaued a little bit in that area, but particularly the percentages when he's had to play Alcaraz have been subpar. What do you make of the serving battle right now in this rivalry?
Yeah, I mean, that's perplexing to me. I agree with what you're saying entirely. What's perplexing to me is why can't he get that percentage up? I mean, there's no reason. I mean, you're playing under a roof in this case. I mean, the conditions have been pretty good for most of their matches, so his percentage should be higher. And it's crucial that he does get it higher, because Carlos can be pretty aggressive on those second serve returns. There's nothing wrong with Sinner's second serve, but Carlos can really make inroads off of Sinner's second. So you don't want to give him, you've got to be way higher than 48. It's got to be at least 60 to 65% in that range. But I don't understand why, I didn't understand why he couldn't find that rhythm, other than that maybe he was tight. Maybe I mean, it really hurts, I think, when you start a match getting broken in the very first game. Like it just it gets you reeling a bit, even if you're Sinner. The last thing you can afford to do it against, and he's aware, very aware of Carlos's serving numbers coming in, and the fact that Carlos had only been broken twice coming into that match. So he's aware as he changes ends that was probably going to prove fatal as far as the first set was concerned. It was a good chance he just does not get it back, and of course he didn't. So I don't know. I think Sinner, he did look apprehensive to me most of that match and frustrated. And you saw him smack the ball once when he lost his serve because he he wasn't happy with the way he was striking that forehand, as you call it, the serve plus one. I mean, he felt an extreme amount of pressure that day for, I guess, for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly in the beginning of the match, I remember distinctly thinking to myself, it's not often you see Sinner look this tight, if ever. And the way he was missing his opportunities to attack off of short balls was extremely uncharacteristic. Then another thing that I noticed was how well he played the 5-4 return game at the end of the match when
Right.
he made all the returns, his ground stroke speed went up considerably throughout that game, and Carlos did so well to hold. But I almost seemed in that moment that Sinner, for the first time, just let loose, and it almost unveiled or revealed a certain level of tightness that he had been carrying with him throughout the match. And the second set was not very convincing to me.
As far as that 5-4 in the fourth game, I entirely agree. I remember thinking the same thing, particularly when he get a great forehand cross court that saved the first match point at 40-15. And then on the second one was when he hit that down the line backhand return winner off the second serve. And I remember thinking to myself, where was this? Where was it? But of course, it's a little easier to do that when your back is to the wall and you just figure, okay, I'm dead. I'm going to go down swinging here. He just has to find that within him sooner. He's got to take that attitude sooner and say, it should have hit him early in the fourth. Okay, I've only had the one break. I've got to go after my returns more. I've got to be more aggressive. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, but I've got to at least try it. And I wonder whether he reflected on that when he left the court, thinking, God, I made a go of it that last game. If only I would have done that more throughout the match. But again, I get back to my earlier point. I still think it was so typical what happened from Deuce is that Carlos works his way in, has an easy overhead, and then he aces him with that beautiful serve out wide, which he was connecting with a lot during the match, anywhere between 128 and 132, right in the corner in the ad court box. And that's an unstoppable serve. So I still put a little bit more, I give more of the credit to Carlos. But I see your point about Sinner in the last game letting loose, because he did.
Yeah. And Alcaraz down 15-30 midway through the fourth, came up with great serves. Next, he had a service game, 4 great serves, holds easily. So that was impressive. What other adjustments from Wimbledon do you feel Carlos made, or at least, if not adjustments, then improvements versus the Wimbledon final?
For some reason, his forehand just seems so much more under control, so much more consistent. There were periods in the Fritz semi at Wimbledon, as an example, or against Fognini in the first round, where his forehand was flying and it looked like he wasn't gauging it well at all. He was very in and out. I felt like this whole tournament, his forehand was on. So I don't know what technical adjustments he might have made, but didn't seem to me he was compromising that much. It just seemed to me he was timing it perfectly and executing it impeccably. So that would backhand to me is always almost perfect. I've never fallen much on the backhand. And then, but the biggest thing was the serve. I mean, he didn't serve anywhere near that well at Wimbledon throughout the tournament. I mean, there were sets, there were moments, there were stretches, but not sustained like he did at the Open. So I still think the serve was the key to it all. And maybe that's one of the reasons why his forehand was so good, was that he was getting through service games so swiftly that it just made him more confident to go after his returns and not to press off the ground, and to feel like he was in control of everything.
Yeah, well, I've generally felt as if Alcaraz on a great forehand day basically just doesn't lose. And usually when he is when he is dropping matches, it's because he wasn't controlling the ball off of that wing as
Right.
well as he would like.
Yeah.
But I guess I totally agree with you that the forehand was probably the biggest difference maker. But I would add the ability to absorb pace when Sinner goes hard into that wing. Like, for example, Sinner's backhand down the line was pretty much shut down. It never felt like that shot got him anywhere as long as Alcaraz was getting to the ball, because Carlos never looked rushed on that forehand wing. And I think it was a combination of giving ground sometimes, playing from a bit deeper in the court, and then using the power to counterattack and not necessarily stay on defense, but to drop back in the court and then to get back to even with a big, powerful shot from deep. And also the maybe some technical adjustments to make things a little bit compact and to set up a little bit lower in general, just so that Sinner, I mean, here's the thing about Sinner's lack of variety. Here's where I think there's some truth to it. His play is to rush you, and he rushes everybody. But Alcaraz didn't look very rushed in New York, and he looked quite rushed at Wimbledon, and he was unable to get his variety off because he looked so rushed. So to me, that was also one of the major differences.
Yeah, good point. I felt like Sinner didn't try. Maybe he got discouraged for the reasons that you just described of how well Carlos countered, how he took that shot away from him. But I felt like at Wimbledon he was more committed to it, and maybe hitting it a bit closer to the sidelines. He won a lot of big points at Wimbledon with a backhand down the line, and
Yeah,
I wish he would have persisted more and made Carlos keep coming up with those shots, which were magnificent. But I think he got a bit discouraged, and that's a very important shot for him in any match he plays against Carlos. And you're right, Carlos was ready for it, and he fended it off. But then after a certain point, I thought Sinner backed away from
he
that
did.
play.
He
Yeah,
did. He
yeah,
absolutely got away from it. I think he tried to reintroduce it when it was a little bit too late, but he absolutely got away from it.
yeah.
All right. Let's I think we can go on. What do you think? Is there anything else
I
on Sinner
no,
Alcaraz?
no, I agree with you. I think I'd like to believe we did a pretty good job with that. No, I think it was pretty thorough.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So Djokovic is an interesting one because he's been narratively in the same place after all of these majors. And most of the people listening to the podcast, Steve, they listen every time. So they've heard our takes on where he's at, and it's just been the same result over and over again. So I don't want to be repetitive. I'm going to ask you this question. The one thing that I think has changed is Novak's sentiment becoming more and more resigned to where he stands. And this US Open press conference was really very candid. So what did you think of what Djokovic had to say after the straight set loss against Alcaraz?
Yeah, listen, you're right. It was candid, and let's face it, you're right. We've been saying the same thing, but on the other hand, along the way, there were some encouraging signs. You beat Carlos in Australia after you won that match at that moment, heading into the semis. I thought, well, if that leg holds up, he's very dangerous. You figured he's going to beat Zverev and at least get a crack at Sinner in the final. Doesn't happen, retires against Zverev. Then he had a pretty clean run in Roland Garros to the Sinner match, but got outplayed there in the semis. So you're thinking, okay, this definitely is getting tougher. And then, but we all thought all along, Wimbledon could be it. And he played well enough. He didn't play his absolute best tennis at Wimbledon, but he came back strong against Di Minor. He held back Caboli, and then had nothing for Sinner because he was clearly that was when he was physically the most crippled, I'd say, of any match he played. I mean, I don't think he would have stepped on that court if it hadn't been a Wimbledon semi, because he just didn't look anywhere near himself that day. So that was discouraging. That was the first sign of him being resigned to things. Was I get to this stage of the tournament and I've got half a tank.
Yeah.
So then now the Open. Okay, didn't play, just like he didn't play between Roland Garros and Wimbledon. Doesn't play between Wimbledon and the Open. It works well enough. Some four setters, but I thought he was getting better. He handled Struff in straight sets, and he gets through the Fritz match. I thought like that was pretty good. There wasn't that much wear and tear. If Fritz had taken him to 5, okay. And he had 2 decent sets in him left for Carlos, but never at any stage did I feel like he thought he was going to win. I think the belief might have kicked in if he won the second set tiebreak. But even when he got the quick break and went up 3-love in the second, and he kind of gave it back and then held serve the rest of the way to get into the tiebreak, but didn't play a classic Novak tie. It was very up and down tiebreak. And then you could see, talk about resignation. And he admitted it afterwards. He just didn't have anything left in the third. He was gassed, as he put it. So my feeling is quite different now. I mean, I was a believer until now. I even thought coming in here there was a shot. But right now, I'm not sure what he's thinking or what he wants. The whole goal, Gill, was to get a 25th this year, and it's a pretty hard target to hit at his age. He did incredibly well to make all four semis, but you don't get any younger. Sinner and Alcaraz are going to continue to get better. They're in their primes. You're slightly past your prime. So now he starts talking in the press conference about trying to beat them in best of three, almost admitting that beating them best of five is next to impossible. I'm not sure. I hope he weighs it when he gets home, that he thinks it over carefully, because I don't think there's a point in playing next year to try to see what more he can do. And I mean, he knocks off Sinner in Monte Carlo. That's going to feel that great, or he beats Carlos in Cincinnati. What is that going to do for him? His standards are higher than that. So I hope, frankly, as someone who has admired him ardently, and I think our listeners know how I feel, and they know how you feel, that I would like to see him consider retiring. I mean, I think he's done it all. The 25th is unnecessary. He's got the men's record. He's tied with Margaret Court anyway. And just let it go. He could go out pretty close to go out after a year when you've been in 4 slam semis, and he's actually right now back up to 4 in the world, is pretty remarkable. And I don't see how it gets better next year. I think it only gets slightly worse, because it's just, he's going to turn 39 in May. It's just, and he has those litany of ailments. We saw it again during the Open, the back, the neck. There's always it's not enough to stop him, but it's enough to bother him. So I'm not sure what his goal is now. He had the goal this year, get the 100 title and try to win the 25th major. He hit one of those targets, but the other one was unreachable. So I'm not sure what he's thinking, other than, I want to feel the affection of the crowds. I want one more year to hear those cheers. But you're not going to hear as many cheers. It's not going to be that much fun to keep hearing the cheers when you're walking off the court after losing a match, as opposed to what he was accustomed to, which was winning.
Well, I think that his thought process is, maybe one of them gets hurt and something happens with the draw, because I'm right there. If there's only 2, there's not 3, there's not 4. If something happens, that might open up a chance. It's a real adjustment in thinking.
Yeah, and it's a very unusual third best. It clearly is. But then you look at the gap. I mean, he wasn't healthy enough to get through the Zverev match, so he has to default after a set in Australia. He gets beaten in straight by Sinner in the French, straight by Sinner at Wimbledon, and straight by Alcaraz at the Open. So it would be different had he lost 6-4 in the 5th to Sinner in Roland Garros, and really close one at Wimbledon, and he went up to, he took Carlos into a 5th at the Open. Scenarios like that. Then I could see, look, I was that close. I can still do it. Those guys they barely beat me, but he knows he's physically not the same guy, especially by the latter stages of these majors. So then to me, it's like, okay, it's true. Suppose one of them is ousted early for other reasons, gets hurt, something like Wimbledon, where Sinner could have lost to Dimitrov and Djokovic wouldn't have had to play him. So maybe you get to the final instead of the semis, but are you going to win that final? You've still had to play 6 matches to get there. You still have to have enough left in that tank. I just don't see it anymore. And I was so optimistic right up until even till pre-Open. But at this point, I'm thinking, I just don't see the scenario. And I say that as someone, I consider myself one of his biggest boosters in the media for a lot of reasons.
Agreed. And I don't see it either. I would say, as far as retirement goes, next year, to me, he has a chance to have still a rewarding year personally if he plays it right. And if he says that it's his last year especially, then, and again, I know that there's pros and cons to that, and it really does create a lot of pressure and distraction. But if he wants to go that route, I think he can have great runs at the biggest tournaments, and it can be a pretty special thing for him, his legacy, and for tennis. But once you push past, because again, like once you start thinking about 2027, based on where his body is in 2025, it becomes hard to imagine that continuing to be rewarding for him and everybody else.
Yeah, I'm even having a hard time seeing it. But you're right. He could go on some runs, but I think to surpass what he did this year will be tough, and he might not be able to equal it. You're right that if he announced in advance, this is my last year, I'm going back to these places for the last time, and I'm going to retire, but I want to enjoy it. Crowds would be euphoric at times, and he'd celebrate some pretty golden moments in the process. But he still might. He's still bound to be struggling physically. I think the other scenario that I kind of like, but I think it's highly unlikely, is that he would announce his retirement toward the end of this year and be celebrated in Australia. Go back there not to play, but for a day like Rafa had at Roland Garros, he'd have his as a 10-time champion in Australia.
Yeah.
And get Roger there and get Rafa there and have the same kind of farewell speech on a court where he was so dominant, where he's won 10 of his 24 majors. So I kind of like that, but I don't see it. He doesn't seem ready for that. Now, maybe he changes his mind in the next couple of months. Maybe. And of course, he's also always got this conflict in his mind about his kids and more time with his family. And he's a bit tormented by that too. But I think the hard part is just this whole letting go. This notion that he's got this close to the end, it's been very difficult for him.
Yeah. All right. So as far as everybody else, before I get into Taylor Fritz and Felix Auger-Aliassime and some of the other players who I want to hit on, I want to ask you a question about like the larger landscape right now in men's tennis. We've talked about how much separation there is between Novak and Sinner and Alcaraz just now. Well, think about everybody else then. It is just an enormous delta, and the tennis looks different. And even the way players are speaking about Jannik and Carlos, it's like they're inhuman and untouchable and indestructible. Do you feel like we're at a point in tennis where the depth at the top is lacking? Do you hold it against that next group as if they are almost weaker than usual?
Hold it against them, not necessarily, but I agree with your point. I mean, Zverev at this point, we've talked about him so many times. Our listeners know our views on that. And another setback for him here against Felix at the Open. And seems to say the same thing every time, that he's going to make amends. But it's just been it's been a bit disappointing stretch for him in the majors this year after the start of the year with Sinner in Australia. So he's the biggest hope, because on his best serving days, he actually strikes me as the guy that could pull the upset. He's the one, by the way, that could take Carlos or Sinner out of Novak's path and give himself a chance, because on his best serving days, he might beat them, not often, but he could pull off that one big upset next year. But he's been disappointing in the sense that we saw so much possibility for him. And there have been stages where we hoped he would put himself in a position to win a major, and he let it get away against Carlos in a sense last year at the French 24, with being up 2-1 and not closing out that final. And then he couldn't make much of an impression at all against Sinner this time, and that's when he was so distraught. And then the rest of his year has been pretty uneven. And and then you have Medvedev, who's at a total crossroads. So it's true that generation, the guys in their late 20s, who should be still able to challenge Carlos and Jannik and make a go of it. Carlos and Jannik are better players, but it shouldn't be this big a gap, but it is. So yeah, I'm a bit disappointed. And then we've seen Tsitsipas kind of disappear too, and there seems like his dip. There's no end in sight to his dip. So we could have a year where Tsitsipas and Medvedev might both finish the year somewhere between 25 and 30 in the world. It's possible. Medvedev has that chance indoors to sort of make some inroads. But I agree, and that it's surprising the way it's all unfolded. It was only the 23 Open that Medvedev had. Granted, the matchup with Carlos is tough for him, but he beats Carlos at the 23 Open. and he was still beating Sinner, right through that year, so late in that year, and now that's all changed. And he had Sinner 2-11 in the Australian final, not this year, but last year in 24. So, yeah, I can't disagree much with what you said. I am a bit disappointed by that generation and the fact that it isn't more competitive with these two young superstars.
Yeah, and I think just what's been missing this year as far as tennis as a product is just a lot of great quarterfinals and
Yes,
semifinals. I mean, Sinner
yes.
and Alcaraz have carried the year from an entertainment standpoint, which is I don't think that's usually the case necessarily that people are kind of sitting around waiting for the final to happen for everybody to get really excited. But I think the lack of stern challenging from a lot of the guys that you just mentioned, it's been something that you could feel that missing. And Shelton did well at Roland Garros, but against
Yeah, he did.
Alcaraz, but
He did.
other than that, it had been one-sided against Ben.
Yeah,
And
and Gil, and then
yeah,
unfortunately, it's true he did well against Carlos and Roland Garros, but then had his usual type of match against Sinner at Wimbledon.
right,
So it kind of brought him back down to earth again. Then he
right.
seemed on the rise over the summer, winning a tournament, and he comes into the Open flying high and suffers that terrible injury. I still think in a couple of years, he may not even be ready to seriously challenge those guys too much next year, but maybe by the year after. He strikes me as a guy who's going to keep getting a lot better. I was really encouraged about Draper, and now look what the injuries just ruined his year. He has, he catches Cilic at his best at Wimbledon, and then it's been, then he had to take all that time off before the Open. Then he has to default out of the second round of the Open. So his year is over. That's so disappointing because Jack was really improving significantly, and he was a guy that I thought might. And he beat Carlos in Indian Wells. He seems to match up pretty well against Carlos. So you'd like to see more of that. But you're right. There's a big gap right now, and that's one of the other things that enables Novak to still be third best is that he's not playing them that often. They're just not in the mix often enough.
I do think it's temporary though.
But
Like people,
Gil, the other thing, just want to add one thing. You're so right. You started this off by talking about we're not getting those the Open. We didn't have many sparklers at the Open.
no.
We just didn't from beginning to end. It was disappointing in that sense. It was nice that I was happy that Sinner and Alcaraz got through and that Novak was in the semi. So we got that. That I thought was intriguing, and you wanted to see those matchups, and fair enough. But along the way, we think of the number of years, especially at the Open, with it being on hard courts, and so many guys can play well on that surface. That we've got one great five setter after another, starting in the first couple of rounds. This year, that was not the case.
And I've even seen some top fives of people racking their brains for the top 5 matches at majors all year. And I look at these lists and I'm just like, not a great year. Not a great year for matches.
No, not at all. Not at all. And you're right. It isn't just the U.S. Open. It's all the way through. And there was a potential for what could have maybe been a great match if Fritz nails down one of the 2-set points he had against Carlos in the semis of Wimbledon, takes that into a fifth. Maybe that could have turned into a great match, but he didn't capitalize. So that flame went out in a hurry.
Yeah, I do want to talk about Taylor. I would just say, as much as I think we've kind of landed in the same place, we kind of agree that there's a piece that's missing as far as the stern challenges to Alcaraz and Sinner right now. I do think it's temporary. When people go 5 years ahead and they say, look at tennis right now, Sinner and Alcaraz are never going to lose because they're so much better.
Yeah.
Give it some time. Like, stuff changes fast. And
it does. It does.
talk about Ben and Jack Draper as 2 players who are getting better quickly, are in their early 20s, have already made good progress. And then you can go to even younger and you can look at a Joao Fonseca and a Jakub Menchik. And then you can look at people who we're not talking about yet because they haven't emerged yet. And Musetti and how he develops. He's a fun player. I don't know if he'll ever be a really good challenger to those guys, but he's an incredible talent. I mean, I would just say it's temporary.
I agree with that. No, I agree. My projection that I made to you earlier, I'm really sort of looking just at when I say I see them playing 3 slam finals, that's just next year. I
Yeah.
wouldn't even want to go as far as the year after, even though I think they'll still be in the forefront because there'll be some developments next year that could change this. And hopefully that will, because it's just better for tennis. It's better for Sinner and Alcaraz, for that matter, that they have to worry about a few other guys and that they don't, in their minds, they don't think it's some kind of automatic march to the final of majors.
Yep. And Runa still has a lot of goods. I don't mean to leave him out completely. And I
Yeah.
really like Flavio Caboli. I think he's the guy right now who's a little bit overlooked as a really great prospect. Um, Taylor against Djokovic. This was another match. I would almost put it in a similar bucket. This was almost really good.
Yes. Right.
I would say of all of the big matches that Fritz has played, and one of them was, some of them have been quite triumphant. You know, the Zverev wins last year at Wimbledon in the US Open, the Tiafoe win in the Wimbledon semifinal. But as far as Fritz losing late at slams, this to me was the one that should disappoint him the most. I thought he did everything he could against Sinner in the US Open final last year. Same thing with the ATP finals last year against Sinner,
Right.
for what it's worth.
Yeah.
This was a match where I thought Taylor Fritz had the level to potentially win, but in the big points he shrunk.
But Gil, did you not think to some degree that was true in the semi of Wimbledon too? That especially if he nails down one of those set points and gets into it, I thought he made a real go
Yes.
of it. I'm not saying I would have bet on him in the fifth,
Well,
but
just
I
one
thought,
thing though about that, Steve. I thought he could have, look, there was opportunity for him to do things on those set points in the tiebreak, but he also did some good things. Like I thought Alcaraz played those points well enough that it didn't leave a really bad taste in my mouth for Taylor to lose those opportunities. But the break points, especially the way the first two sets went against Novak, it was to me pure tightness, pure being overwhelmed by the aura of Novak Djokovic and the occasion. And that was it. Because as soon as the scoreboard got tight, it was just he couldn't do what he needs to do.
yeah, I agree with you, with the exception of the game at the end of the first set when Novak served it out and saved 5, 6 break points, and he was so tough on the break, and then he was the most emotional in that phase because he wanted to close out that set. But then there were so many others. It's true, and Novak was under an unusual amount of pressure on his serve. Then, of course, as Fritz did agrees with you. But what Fritz said that I agree with is that in the fourth set is when they both were at their best, and suddenly you had a more normal set that came down to one break at the end. The others were a little topsy turvy, and it came down to that one break game for Novak with Taylor at 4-5, and Taylor saving the 2 match points and even having a game point before Novak won the match on a double fault.
It was a great game, but he was holding so easily for 2 sets. I mean, he was flying through his service games. He was winning
Yeah,
90% of first serve points. But as soon as it was 4-5 in the fourth,
yeah, oh yeah.
I felt like he was going to get broken.
Yeah, and look, that's scoreboard pressure, but that also is credit to Novak for the way that the service games that he played along the way. Because suddenly, except for one game that he had 40 love where he led him back to deuce, they were mainly very comfortable holds. And then
Yeah.
so then he kept putting that scoreboard pressure on Taylor. And you're right, Taylor stood up to it until 4-5. Didn't surprise me at 4-5. And what surprised me more was the Djokovic reaction afterwards. He was so upset with himself about the missed backhands on the first 2 match points. He was kind of beating himself up over that a little bit, and maybe not giving himself enough credit for moving back on the return of serve on that last match point and making Taylor think a little bit. And then, sure enough, he got the double fault. But you're right. No, look, at somewhere along the line, though, Taylor has to show. I mean, you alluded to 2 Sinner matches, the Open last year in Turin, and then we talked about Alcaraz at Wimbledon. So there's 3 different players, lots of opportunity. I'm not saying he gave himself up, but those were opportunities going in where he had a chance to prove that he was ready to move to another level. Hasn't been able to do it. On the plus side, he's had a pretty good year all around. I suspect he'll finish the year pretty close to 5 in the world. So he hasn't dipped that much. But I just think those top guys, the 3 guys that he's been talking about for the last year that he respects so much, he hasn't been able to make it happen against them.
No. And yeah, it's just, I think for Fritz, it's painful when he can't even execute his strengths on a big point, especially when on the smaller points he's doing it just fine. And I think with his pedigree, he was a finalist at the US Open last year. He's
Right.
been 4 in the world. That's
Yeah.
when you start to expect you're not going to get overwhelmed by the scoreboard. Like 4-5 is not going to bother you. But I think Djokovic in the head-to-head, and by the way, credit to Novak for serve and volleying so brilliantly throughout that 4th set.
Oh,
Unbelievable
yeah.
execution there.
Absolutely. That was a big factor.
So let's talk Felix. I cannot say enough about his level. I thought he was playing terrific tennis, and he earned the upset win over Zverev, and he earned the straight set win over Rublev. And the De Minaur match was really tight on both ends, but he does what he has to do to get through that one. And then he really made a good account for himself in the semifinal against Sinner, which I think a lot of people were coming in thinking, uh-oh, this might not deliver. And it did. It was
Yeah.
a really entertaining match.
And better
So,
than the score, right, Gil? I thought he played better than the score in the sense that those
agreed.
last sets, he had chances early that could have made a difference. And so it's not like he went away after that second set. He played well enough in the third and fourth that he could feel pretty good about himself.
Agreed. So the tournament itself, awesome. The playing it forward and the questions of, is Felix a new thing now? Has he elevated to another level? And that's where I say, well, I've been here a bunch of times before. Felix has had multiple moments throughout his career where I've said, wow, this is incredible tennis. This is fantastic. He's figured it out. It's clicked. Those moments haven't had staying power, and the dips come. So I am not convinced, as incredible as that was, that it's going to stay that way.
Nor am I, sadly, because he's an electrifying player. The galleries love him. Just an appealing guy. He plays a bit differently than a lot of the others. He likes to attack. He's got a beautiful serve. Backhand, to me, looked more solid than ever. I thought guys were really having trouble getting to his backhand, and that was one of the keys to the 3 wins that you mentioned, and to the Sinner match. So then the question is, okay, this time is he going to demand it of himself? 4 years ago when he lost to Medvedev in the semis, I thought there are times since then I've just felt like he goes into these slumps inexplicably. And now maybe there are injuries we don't know about, things we don't know about in his private life. It could be for any number of reasons, but it's been disappointing that he hasn't sustained that. This is going to be the real test. He's got to try to end this year strong and then start right in at the Australian Open next year and prove that he can go deep into some more majors, because those are 3 excellent wins, and as you say, he deserved them all, and they're all frontline players. So I want to see Felix prove that he belongs in the top 10 in the world for a long time, that he climbs in there, stays there, and no more of these dips. But I'm not confident that he will.
I'm with you. However, he should find himself in the ATP finals because he's 10th in the race. Novak might not play. Draper is out. He loves indoor hard courts. He should be in Turin. And by the way, those are probably the conditions that I would design for Felix. If I could customize conditions for him, it would be exactly what you get in Italy.
Yeah, I agree. And I think he feels that way. So that would be nice. But then even then, if he gets to Turin, has a good turn, finishes the year 6, 7 in the world, let's say, he's got to carry it forward. He's got to has to ask it of himself. Somehow there are times when I get the feeling he just enjoys the life, and he's willing to take some of these losses, and they've got to sting more than they have. And hopefully that'll be the case. The pride will kick in, and he'll realize that he's got an opportunity here, and he's got to take it.
Yep. I think the body can be a little fragile, and the confidence can be a little fragile as well. So oftentimes the slumps are spurred on by one or both of those things happening. All right, pleasure as always. We've done it again, all 4 in 2025. One of my great honors, and all the viewers and the listeners love hearing from you, Steve, as do I. So let's keep it going.
Thank you, Gil. Pleasure to be on.